Chapter 3. Frozen World. When the city froze, it did so with a cruelty that felt almost intimate. They moved through tableau after tableau, moments nailed into place with the neatness of a museum exhibit and the cold violence of something that had been stopped mid-breath. Lovers held hands forever at a crosswalk, knuckles white. A courier's parcel hovered at chest height, the paper flapping as if pushed by a wind that had been paused. A child leaned forward on the steps of a stoop, mouth open in a laugh that would never finish. Ava's throat tightened at each scene. Up close the frozen faces were terrible in their ordinariness. The half-glances, the tiny human gestures you never notice until they are the only thing left. There was a vulnerability to the paused moments that made her feel as if she were walking through someone's private grief. Eli walked beside her like a man learning to read a language he had never been taught. He kept his eyes scanning, noting details. A discarded scarf, a bicycle chain thrown across the curb, that would have been meaningless in any other night. Here they were clues. Here, observation was not merely curiosity. It was a small kind of prayer. They had agreed to move slowly. Ava refused to leave the man she had been treating earlier. He remained on the pavement, a paper cup of frozen coffee balanced inches from his lips. She'd come back for him between their explorations, fingers brushing his skin to check a pulse that did not falter, to ground herself in something tactile. The checks meant nothing mechanically. Time wouldn't resume by pressure, nor would intervention unfreeze a breath, but the rituals mattered. They anchored her. They reminded her she still belonged to a world that had been, and might yet be again. "Do you ever get used to scenes like this?" Eli asked once, voice low, as they stepped into an alley where a laundromat's tumble dryer hung inert, a shirt frozen halfway through the door. Ava let out a short laugh that had more bone than warmth. "You don't get used to them. You make peace with the fact that you can't save everything." She didn't want him looking at her like that, the look that said he knew fragments of sorrow. Not yet. There were parts of her the city had not earned the right to see. He studied her for a second, then nodded, but there was a softness in his expression that suggested he felt the same, that he had his own private ledger of losses. "That's unfair," he muttered, but there was no argument in his tone, just a tired agreement. They pressed on. The farther they went from the center of the explosion, the thin scar of light that had cut the sky, the more surreal the stillness became. At the train platform, an entire commuter car hung with doors open and shoes mid-step on the edge of a step. Posters on the wall, advertising concerts and new restaurants, stared with their unblinking fonts. A woman cradled a baby, eyes closed, a droplet of something suspended at the baby's lip like a jewel. "It feels theatrical," Eli said. "Like we're in the director's cut of a film." Ava's fingers trailed against a metal seat, cold, immovable. Like someone paused the reel and forgot to press play again. They moved as if treading the inside of a held breath. The city's silence had a volume of its own. It pressed against their ears, against their thoughts. Ava found herself measuring her motions now. Smaller, careful, fearing some unseen consequence to sudden movement. There was a superstition to it, ridiculous and persistent. Do not startle the world. They came upon a man on a bench halfway between two street lamps. He had thrown his hands up as if averting something seen only to him. Papers spiraled around him in a frozen tornado. His mouth formed an O. Ava crouched and checked him because movement was what she knew to do. Her gloved fingers found the familiar map of bone and pulse. He was alive, trapped in a biological stasis that no instrument could yet explain. She smoothed his coat down, as if the fraction of kindness might mean anything to him. Eli remained standing, watching. "Does this feel like," he began. "Like what?" Ava prompted. "Like the world didn't want to be seen at the end." He sounded absurdly philosophical, the soldier reduced to poet by a silence that had no handbook. "It looks like it's embarrassed," she said after a beat, the image forming in her mind of the city folding its hands over its face. Like it took a breath and then realized it was naked. Eli's laugh was almost inaudible, a thin thing that existed more for the sound of it than to relieve the tension. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe it just needs time to think." Ava wanted to ask him about his unit, about where he'd been stationed, about the things soldiers carried home like stones, but she felt the question and then took it back. There would be time. There was always time, but this was not the kind that allowed for slow confession. Instead, she asked, "Where exactly were you when it happened?" "Docks. Patrol. Late shift," he answered. "Saw the sky tear. Felt the boom. Then everything stopped. I thought maybe I was the only one." "You weren't," Ava said. It was absurd and comforting that their reasons for being awake in this paused second were so mundane. They had both been doing jobs that were concrete, urgent, practiced. It gave them a commonness that softened the strangeness. They moved on together. Conversation, initially practical, then meandering, then dangerously close to personal, helped to tether them to each other. Eli asked about the ambulance, about her years in emergency services, about why she still worked nights. Ava gave evasive, professional answers at first. "Because people need me. Because it's meaningful." But watchful as she was, Eli saw the loose ending of each reply, the way she folded her hands away from the stories that might break something inside her. He pressed further, not in an aggressive way, but with the curiosity of a man used to reading faces for danger. "Did you always want to be a paramedic?" he asked. Ava stopped, staring at a shop window where mannequins were frozen in a half-dance. She wanted to deflect. Instead, she felt the old ache, sharp as a stone lodged in the throat, and the words slipped half-formed. "My mother was a nurse." She didn't offer more. Eli listened like that was enough, as if he unconsciously honored the fence she'd put up. "That explains the hands," he said. "They're steady." "They're steady when it counts," she corrected, but she did not push him away. The compliment warmed her in the way tea does when you've been out in the cold. They worked down side streets, checking windows and doorways. Eli kept to the edges, as if expecting something to come crawling out from shadows. Not all the movement was pleasant. Here and there, small objects vibrated, a thrum under glass or the hum of a neon sign trembling like a plucked string. It felt like a pressure, a small tremor at the edge of perception, the first betrayals of the freeze. Ava noticed it when a puddle at their feet rippled though nothing touched it, and when a streetlight flickered not because of power but because its own face seemed unsure. "Temporal instability," Eli said at one point, using a phrase that seemed to roll off his tongue with uncomfortable familiarity. Ava frowned. "You know physics now, soldier?" He made a small, rueful smile. "I read what I have to. Explosives, shock waves, structural integrity. It all comes in handy when the ground doesn't want to cooperate." She laughed outright then, absurdly delighted at how normal it sounded to exchange facts about shattered logic in the midst of a world that had paused. It was the most human sound either of them had made since the sky split. The city was becoming a book they both had to learn to read fast. They marked landmarks for each other. The bakery with its crust forever cooling, the bookstore whose front door glowed with a frozen cart of returns. They kept their route tight, mindful of the fact that neither of them knew how long the stamina of this waking would last. They foraged for food only when necessity became literal hunger. Canned goods opened with a hand-cranked can opener that seemed to belong to another age. They ate under the shadow of a clock tower whose hands lay like crossed bones on its face. And everywhere watches and clocks read 1 second. The repetition was a chant. It knitted the irrational into a thread, a pattern that began to mean something. This freeze was not random. It had chosen a second, chosen a single stubborn heartbeat to lock in place. As the sky grew lower, if skies could be said to grow, Ava felt the edges of the world fray. She saw a street sign bloom with a faint white light. It spread like a stain across the brick, and the mortar around it seemed to lose its color, as if someone were running an eraser across a drawing. Eli observed it first. Hand going to the sidearm he carried out of instinct more than intent. "Do you see that?" he asked. Ava nodded, throat dry. "It looks like it's fading." The light at the corner pooled and stretched, a bright licking seam that crawled along the wall, erasing the grain of the brick like a brush sweeping away chalk dust. For a moment they both stood transfixed, the sound of their own breathing loud and fragile in the hush. "Whatever this is," Eli whispered, voice small, "it's not just stopping time." Ava's fingers went numb as if the thought itself chilled her blood. "It's unmaking things." The seam advanced a fraction. The world around it, once so stubbornly detailed, began to bleed away at the edges, colors running into nothing. In the space where brick should have been, there was now a kind of absence, an invisible hole you could see through like fog. Eli took a step back. He looked at Ava with a worry that had teeth. "We should go," he said. "We should get further away from that." She wanted to linger, to watch, to understand, but the sensible part of her, the part that still swore oaths to save people, pulled her along. They moved, but even as they retreated, the seam pulsed as if impatient, as if measuring what could be erased next. Ava's palms were damp. She could feel a pressure building behind her ribs, an old, pressing grief she had never catalogued for anyone. She thought for an impossible moment of the boy she had failed years ago, the one whose small body had been colder than she could forgive herself for, and for reasons she could not yet name. A hollow pain opened when she thought of the man she had not been able to save. She closed her eyes. The world hummed so low it was almost a sound. When she opened them, the seam had retreated slightly, like a tide pulling back, but it left a mark. A missing corner of the city, a small, precise scar. Eli watched her, and there was something in his face she could not read. Concern, yes. Caution, always. And something threaded beneath both, a wary empathy. "If this keeps happening," he said softly, "we'll need to find shelter. A place with solid walls." Ava nodded. She believed him. She also believed that whatever shelter they found would feel less like refuge and more like waiting room before decision. The city had become an exam she was failing to finish, and she did not yet know the questions. They walked on, leaving the erasing light behind them for the moment. The frozen world was not safe. It was seductive and luminous, full of human tableaus that demanded to be looked at, and behind the curiosity, a darkness that swallowed edges whole. As they rounded the corner of an old municipal building, a sliver of something like fear grew at the base of Ava's skull. The seam's retreat had been temporary. The air felt thinner, as if someone had unstrung a harp and she could hear the last notes stretch into nothing. The city, she thought bleakly, had not simply stopped. It was beginning to forget itself. Chapter 4. The cracks in the second. The world was beginning to fray. Ava and Eli felt it first as a tension in the air, something neither breeze nor temperature could explain. It hummed under their feet, a tremor too subtle for earthquakes, too deliberate for imagination. A shiver in the frozen second, like the tick of a clock trying to resurrect itself. But clocks didn't tick anymore. Not here. Not in this hollow second suspended between a heartbeat and oblivion. Ava tightened her grip on the strap of her medic bag as they walked, her boots scraping the pavement with a sound that felt almost disrespectful. Every noise they made belonged to them alone. Everything else remained painfully still. The city's silence had weight, pressed on the bones. They passed an intersection where a delivery truck had stalled diagonally across the road, its headlights carving a frozen cone of light across abandoned storefronts. At first, Ava didn't notice what was wrong. Not until Eli seized her wrist with a quiet, urgent, "Wait." She followed his gaze. Along the side of the truck the paint was peeling. No, that wasn't right. It wasn't peeling. It was unraveling. A patch the size of her palm shimmered faintly, like a mirage above hot asphalt. Colors bled outward, losing saturation before fading completely. Underneath where the paint had been, there was no metal, no rust, no scratches. Just blank nothingness. Ava stepped closer. It looks like the world is forgetting the truck exists. Eli's jaw tightened. It wasn't like this yesterday. A memory shivered through Ava. The seam in the brick wall, glowing, erasing itself like the page of a book rubbed clean. "It's spreading," she whispered. "Or accelerating." Eli's voice was quiet, controlled but only barely. "Whatever froze this second, it's starting to lose hold." Ava could hear the unspoken. Or it's consuming the world outright. They moved on. Not because they wanted to leave the frightening phenomenon behind, but because they didn't trust what would happen if they lingered near dissolving reality. They headed toward the outer district, following Eli's hunch that if anything in the city held answers, it would be the Aerospace Research Center near the river, the one that studied gravitational anomalies and deep space telemetry. "It's a long shot," he said, hands straying near his holster though there was nothing to guard against. "But if the sky split the way we think it did, someone at the center might have been tracking something. Or they were caught in the same freeze as everyone else," Ava replied. He offered a faint smile. "Still worth checking." They walked in silence for several minutes, passing scenes that unfolded like a museum curated by catastrophe. A mail carrier frozen mid-step, envelopes scattering outward like paper birds trapped in the moment before flight. A taxi driver staring into his rear-view mirror at a woman in the back seat, whose eyes were wide with something that would never finish turning into fear. Each frozen life tugged at Ava's chest like a loose thread. Eventually Eli spoke again, his tone softer. "Back there, with that man on the bench. The way you touched his coat. You do that with all your patience." She knew what he was really asking. "That's not a medical gesture," he added quietly. "That's something else." Ava hesitated, her breath stirring the cold air. She didn't want to talk about this. Not here. Not when the world was falling apart and she still felt responsible for people she could no longer save. But Eli was watching her. Not demanding, not prying, just offering space. "It reminds me they're human," she said at last, voice fragile. "It's easy to forget that when everything is blood and chaos and panic. You forget." "Sometimes," she admitted. "Not who they are, but who I am." Eli slowed, almost stopping. "What do you mean?" Ava's throat tightened. She shook her head. "It doesn't matter." "It does. To you it does." The softness in his voice almost undid her. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "I lost someone once. Someone young. I promised him he'd be okay. He wasn't." Eli's face hardened, not with anger, but with shared understanding, the kind only people who'd held someone dying could ever feel. "I'm sorry," he murmured. Ava nodded, the memory burning behind her ribs. "I think that's why I can't leave the injured man behind. Even if I can't help him." "You're still helping," Eli said. "Just by staying." Something in Ava unwound just slightly. The world was cracking open, but Eli was the first person in years who didn't try to fix her mistakes with platitudes. The aerospace center loomed ahead, steel and glass frozen in a perpetual reflection of the sky that had betrayed them. The building's automatic doors were open, caught mid-slide. Inside, the air felt strangely charged. Not moving but vibrating. As if the building itself remembered motion even though it couldn't participate. They stepped through the atrium, past a receptionist stiffened behind her desk, her hand paused above a keyboard. A potted plant had toppled onto the floor, soil scattering in midair, each grain suspended like tiny asteroids. "Jesus," Eli murmured. Ava touched the frozen soil, letting it sift through her fingers, but it didn't fall. It stayed exactly where it had been. "Gravity's inconsistent," she whispered. "Selective," Eli corrected. "Like different parts of reality are following different rules." They found the research wing on the 3rd floor. Eli pried open the office of the director, and Ava's breath hitched when she stepped inside. Paperwork littered the desk, graphs, readings, emergency alerts. A large monitor displayed a waveform, frozen at a peak, labeled "Gravitational Anomaly Recording, 23 hours 59 minutes and 59 seconds. And beneath it, "Secondary spike detected 1 second." Ava ran her fingers along the edge of the screen. Eli sifted through printed reports with shaking hands. "It wasn't just a meteor," Ava said. "No," Eli murmured, eyes scanning. "Look at this." He handed her a sheet with bold red text. "Interference pattern detected. Possible spatial superposition event." Ava frowned. Superposition? Like two things occupying the same space? "Or two universes," Eli said. "Overlapping." A quiet dread sank into her bones. The sky splitting. The explosion. Time freezing. Reality unraveling. "Eli," she whispered, "what if the world didn't stop? What if we're inside a collision of two realities? A moment caught between them?" His breathing faltered. "It would explain why we're still moving," he said slowly. "Why physics is breaking. Why the freeze isn't stable." Ava stepped back from the desk, suddenly dizzy. "So this isn't time stopping," she said. It's time-tearing. They found more files. Telemetry confirming gravitational distortions near the edge of the atmosphere. Satellite readings detecting objects coming into orbit that didn't match known bodies. A final report half-finished with the words, "Impact threshold imminent. Unknown consequence to temporal fabric." The sentence ended mid-dash. As if the scientist writing it had been pulled out of time mid-thought. Ava wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold. "We need to find answers. Real answers." "We will," Eli said. "We just..." He stopped abruptly. "Eli." Ava stepped toward him. But he didn't answer. He was staring at a filing cabinet drawer he had pulled open, a drawer marked strictly confidential. His hands were trembling. "Eli, what is it?" He lifted a file slowly, carefully, as though afraid it might shatter. Eva leaned close. What she saw made her breath vanish. Photograph. Grainy. Harsh lighting. Emergency medical setting. A soldier lying unconscious on a stretcher. Oxygen mask strapped to his face, blood soaking through bandages on his shoulder and chest. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing part was the face. The face was Eli's. A little younger, maybe. Rougher around the edges. But undeniably him. Ava's heart pounded. "Eli," she whispered. He didn't blink. Didn't breathe. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "That's me," he said. "But I don't remember this. I don't remember being here. I don't remember this injury." Ava touched the photograph with shaking fingers. "Then where," she whispered, "is the version of you this file belongs to?" The silence that followed was deeper than the frozen world around them. It was the silence of something unraveling. Inside him. Inside her. Inside the moment they thought they understood. And somewhere behind the walls, reality cracked again. A faint seam of white light crawled across the far corner of the building, erasing the plaster like a photograph burning from the edges inward. The world wasn't just frozen. It was breaking. And Eli might not belong to this one at all.